They called her the Blood Countess, a woman so beautiful that noblemen trembled before her smile, and so monstrous that peasants whispered her name only behind bolted doors. But before the crimson legends, before the screams that echoed through the corridors of Csejthe Castle, Elizabeth Báthory was a daughter of privilege, born into the very heart of Hungarian power, and destined to inherit both its glory and its madness. The birth of a monster. The Carpathian mountains rose like the ribs of a sleeping giant, their snowy crowns shrouded in mist. Beneath their shadow lay the sprawling Báthory estates, dark forests, stone fortresses, and villages where hunger lived longer than hope. It was here that Elizabeth was born, a child of two of Hungary's most powerful families, the Báthorys and the Nadasdys, a union forged in politics, not affection. From the beginning, she was told she was different, not just in beauty, though even as a child she was praised for her luminous skin and raven-black hair, but in blood. Your lineage, her nurse would whisper, was chosen by God and feared by men. Yet that same blood carried madness. Her uncle was known for wild fits of rage. Her aunt practiced strange rituals in secret. Elizabeth grew up watching cruelty not as a crime but as entertainment, a lesson she would never unlearn. When she was only 6, she saw her first execution. A thief caught stealing grain was dragged into the courtyard. Elizabeth, perched beside her mother, watched the man's pleading face twist in agony. Her mother's expression never changed. "Discipline keeps order," she told her daughter. "Mercy breeds rebellion." Elizabeth did not look away. A marriage of power at 15. She was married off to Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier famed for his brutality against the Ottoman Turks. Their wedding feast lasted 3 days, attended by nobles, priests, and mercenaries who toasted to blood and victory. Ferenc gifted his young bride a castle, Csejthe, a fortress perched atop a cliff in Upper Hungary. "Here," he told her, "you will rule in my absence," and absence would define their marriage. Ferenc spent most of his life at war, leaving Elizabeth alone with her servants, her wealth, and her imagination. She learned to manage estates, punish disobedient peasants, and charm visiting nobles. Letters show she was intelligent, fluent in Latin and German, and versed in the sciences of her age. But behind the refinement lurked a restless hunger. When Ferenc did return, he shared with her tales of battlefield cruelty, of Turks impaled alive, of enemies burned in pits of oil. He laughed as he recounted them, calling them necessary lessons for the disloyal. Elizabeth listened, fascinated. Sometimes he even demonstrated. Together they became notorious among servants for disciplinary games. Some claimed Ferenc taught her the art of torture. Others whispered that she surpassed even him in imagination. When he died in 1604, the Countess inherited not just his lands but his darkness. The widow of Csejthe by then, Elizabeth was in her 40s, still striking, still proud. Her husband's death left her lonely but free. She surrounded herself with a coterie of strange companions. Dorothea Sentes, the coarse-tongued housekeeper, Ilona Jo, the iron-handed maid, and a mysterious woman known as Anna Darvulia, rumored to be a witch. Darvulia became her confidant, and, some said, her corrupter. Together they began what villagers would later call the experiments. It started small. A slap here, a harsh punishment there. A maid who spilled wine found herself locked in the cellar. A girl who tore a dress was beaten until she could no longer stand. But as months passed, the punishments grew inventive, whispered to involve needles, ice, and strange rites conducted by candlelight. Elizabeth justified it all. "They must learn obedience," she would tell her steward. "They must fear me or they will steal from me." And when bruised girls disappeared from the castle, the peasants looked away. Who would accuse a Báthory? The noble's word was law. The poor had none. The rumors began by 1609. The rumors had become impossible to ignore. Local priests spoke of girls vanishing after being summoned to serve at Csejthe. Mothers wept outside the castle gates, begging for their daughter's return. A merchant claimed to have seen blood dripping from a window at dawn. Still, the authorities did nothing. Elizabeth was untouchable. Her cousin sat in parliament. Her family financed the crown. Even the King of Hungary owed her money. But power breeds blindness, and pride is a blade that cuts its wielder first. A new kind of beauty, the first true horror, came, the legend says, one winter evening. A young maid brushed Elizabeth's hair and accidentally pulled too hard. The Countess struck her, a casual blow that drew blood. A drop splashed onto Elizabeth's hand. Later, she claimed she saw her skin glow where the blood had touched it, smoother, younger, radiant. Whether this was delusion, witchcraft, or imagination, we will never know. But it was the spark that ignited the inferno. From that night onward, her obsession with youth consumed her. She demanded young maidens be brought to her, peasant girls at first, then daughters of lesser nobles. She bathed, it was said, in their blood, believing it restored her beauty. The castle became a labyrinth of screams. Servants vanished. Windows were shuttered. The surrounding forest grew silent, and still no one dared to speak her name aloud. By the turn of the 17th century, the once golden halls of Csejthe Castle had turned into a prison of whispers. Outside, winter winds howled through the mountains. Inside, candles burned low, and no laughter echoed anymore. Only fear remained. Fear of the Countess, whose beauty had become a mask for something far darker. Whispers in the walls, the peasants in the surrounding villages began to notice strange things. At night, smoke would rise from the castle's chimneys long after midnight. Dogs howled at the gates. When dawn came, the courtyard would be washed clean, but not of everything. Sometimes the snow bore faint pink stains leading toward the well. Old women told their grandchildren never to look at the castle after sunset. "If she sees you," they said, "you'll never come home again." Inside, the servants spoke only in murmurs. The corridors echoed with the clatter of keys and the thud of footsteps hurrying away from locked doors. Elizabeth's maid, Dorothea, kept an iron key ring at her waist, each key opening a room where screams were swallowed by stone. No one dared question her. To question was to disappear. The rituals of beauty, Elizabeth's vanity, became her religion. Mirrors filled her chamber, polished bronze, Venetian glass, even silver sheets. She would stare into them for hours, studying every wrinkle, every shadow beneath her eyes. "Age," she once said, "is the only enemy that cannot be conquered by wealth or war, but perhaps by blood." Her confidant, Anna Darvulia, encouraged the belief. She spoke of alchemy and purity, of life essence that could be transferred from the young to the old. Together they conducted what they called purifications, a word that made the servants tremble. Darvulia brewed potions from herbs and oils. Elizabeth provided the rest. It was said that afterward, the Countess would emerge from her chambers glowing, serene, as though she had stepped through the veil of youth itself. But one winter night, Darvulia fell ill. Blindness overtook her, and within days she died. The castle mourned her in silence, and Elizabeth buried her near the chapel, marking the grave with no name. Yet without her teacher, her hunger only deepened. The blood servants to replace her fallen companion. Elizabeth gathered others, Ilona Jo, the maid who obeyed without question, Catalin Benica, a former nurse who mixed herbs into the Countess's strange tonics, and Fichko, a deformed servant boy who carried out the cruelest orders. They became her instruments, her family of shadows. She would summon them by candlelight, her voice soft as silk. "Bring me another," she'd say. A girl with good skin, strong blood. And they would obey, dragging terrified peasant girls from nearby villages under promises of work. Some were never seen again. Others were returned broken, mute, pale, trembling. Their parents wept at the church steps, but when priests demanded entry to the castle, the gates remained sealed. "The Countess is unwell," her steward would reply. "She receives no visitors." But the bells of Csejthe tolled more often now, for funerals that had no bodies. The arrival of the nobles, it was in 1609 that Elizabeth's ambitions took a fatal turn. Peasant girls were vanishing too quickly. Suspicion grew, so she turned to a different source, the daughters of minor nobility. "They will serve as ladies-in-waiting," she announced. "I will teach them refinement." Families, honored by her attention, sent their daughters eagerly. They arrived in bright carriages, carrying letters of introduction and smiles of innocence. Within weeks, they too were gone. Unlike the peasants, these families had power, and friends in court. Whispers reached Vienna, to the ear of King Matthias II himself. He owed Elizabeth a great debt of money, but now, rumors offered him a reason not to pay, so he sent a man to investigate. György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, a trusted noble, and ironically, Elizabeth's own cousin. The first investigation, Thurzo arrived under the pretense of friendship. Elizabeth welcomed him warmly, dressed in mourning black and perfumed with lilac. "Cousin," she said with a smile, "what brings you to my humble home?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he asked about the missing girls. Her eyes hardened. "Lies," she replied. "Spread by jealous peasants. He dined with her that night." The meal was exquisite, the conversation polished. But Thurzo could not ignore the unease in the air. The servants avoided eye contact. The corridors smelled faintly of iron and something else, something sweet, sickly. When he retired to his guest chamber, he swore he heard crying from below the floor. The next morning, Elizabeth dismissed him politely. "You have nothing to fear here," she said. "Csejthe is a house of virtue." Thurzo left with a courteous bow, but also with a promise. He would return. The letter of warning a priest from the nearby town of Vag issued a report soon after, describing unholy acts committed against maidens in the castle of the Lady Báthory. He claimed to have seen mutilated bodies buried behind the chapel. The local bishop forwarded the complaint to the king. Now there was no turning back. Elizabeth's cousins, fearing the stain on their family, pleaded with her to stop whatever she was doing. But she laughed. "Do you think they will arrest me?" she said. "I am a Báthory. I have fed their wars, filled their treasuries, and married their sons. I am beyond judgment. But power, like beauty, fades when the light changes, and soon the light would turn against her." The final winter, December 1610. Snow buried the countryside. The castle's towers stood black against the pale horizon. Inside, Elizabeth prepared another lesson for her servants. She could not know that this would be her last. That night, Thurzo returned, not alone this time, but with armed guards and royal decrees. They surrounded the castle before dawn, torches flickering against the frost. Inside, Elizabeth was holding court in her private chamber. Her servants knelt beside her. On the floor lay a young girl, motionless. The doors burst open. Thurzo entered, his face ashen. "In the name of His Majesty the King," he declared, "you are accused of murder, witchcraft, and cruelty beyond reason." Elizabeth rose slowly. "You dare accuse me?" she hissed. "In my own house?" Thurzo's men fanned out, uncovering what lay hidden: bound victims, instruments of torture, and blood-soaked linens. One chamber was so vile that even the hardened soldiers turned away. Elizabeth stared at them with calm defiance. "They were thieves," she said. "Liars. They deserved punishment." But Thurzo only whispered, "God have mercy." That night, the Blood Countess was placed under house arrest, not in chains, but within the very walls that had once echoed her laughter. Her reign of terror had ended, but her legend, that had only begun. They said the snow that winter never melted around Csejthe Castle, as if the earth itself refused to cleanse what had been done there. Soldiers carried out bodies in silence. Priests murmured prayers in trembling voices, and the great halls once filled with music became tombs of accusation. The Blood Countess had finally been caught. But how does one judge a woman who believed herself above God? The fall of a noble house. When word of Elizabeth Báthory's arrest reached the royal court in Vienna, shock rippled through Europe's noble circles. How could a woman of such lineage, cousin to princes, godmother to generals, be accused of such abominations? King Matthias II saw opportunity in outrage. Not only could he erase the debt he owed her family, but he could also display the crown's moral authority. "Let there be no doubt," he declared, "that even the greatest of Hungary's bloodlines must answer to divine justice." Yet among the nobles, whispers persisted. Will they truly punish her? Some asked. Or will her name protect her even now? The testimonies begin in January 1611. Trials began in the cold stone courtroom of Csejthe Castle. Elizabeth herself was not present. She refused to appear, and her family ensured that she never would. Instead, her 4 servants faced judgment in her place: Dorothea Sentes, Ilona Jo, Catalin Benica, and Fichko. Before the judges sat a table stacked with records, testimonies, and reports, but none could prepare them for what they would hear. Under interrogation, Dorothea, the housekeeper, broke first. She described the Countess's punishments, her fury, and the endless need for fresh girls. She spoke of blood, needles, iron cages, of chambers where no one entered twice. We obeyed her, Dorothea wept. To disobey meant death. Ilona Jo confirmed the horrors, adding names of victims, some peasant, some noble. She said their beauty was her right, Ilona testified, that God had given it to her to take. Fichko, trembling and half-mad, claimed to have seen her bathe in red water while praying for eternal youth. His words, though wild, echoed what the villagers had long believed. The courtroom shuddered at the confessions. Judges crossed themselves. Priests turned pale. But Elizabeth herself said nothing. She remained locked in her tower, writing letters to her cousin Thurzo. Letters filled not with remorse, but indignation. I am innocent, she insisted. My enemies wish to destroy me. The girls died of sickness, and not by my hand. They hate me because I am powerful. The evidence of horror Thurzo, bound by duty, catalogued the findings from the castle. The list was staggering: blood-stained dresses, ropes, cages, iron implements, and ledgers with names of over 650 girls, some marked with symbols, others crossed out. Was it proof of murder or merely the Countess's bookkeeping? No one could say for certain, but the sheer number was damning. Priests testified that when they tried to bury the bodies, the ground around the castle refused to settle. Wolves dug them up within days. Even the earth, it seemed, rejected what had happened there. The court faced a dilemma. To execute her would stain the entire Báthory name. To free her would enrage the crown and the people, and so they devised a compromise, one that would satisfy both justice and politics. Her servants would die. She would be buried alive within her own walls. The servants' fate. On January 7, 1611, the servants were led to execution. Dorothea and Ilona, deemed ringleaders, were burned alive after their fingers were torn off with iron pincers, their screams echoing across the courtyard. Catalin, who had shown lesser guilt, was beheaded before the flames touched her. Fichko, the crippled boy, was executed soon after. Their deaths, meant to cleanse the sins of their mistress, only deepened the legend. Villagers who witnessed the execution whispered that black smoke curled into the shape of a woman's face, smiling. The imprisonment of the Countess. Elizabeth Báthory was confined to her bedchamber in Csejthe Castle. The room was bricked up, its windows sealed, its door reduced to a narrow slot through which food and water were passed. Guards were posted outside, forbidden to speak to her. For the first time, the Countess of Csejthe was utterly alone. At first, she raged. She screamed at the guards, calling them cowards and traitors. "Do you not know who I am?" she thundered. "I am Báthory Erzsébet, daughter of the dragon, of Transylvania. You are nothing." When rage brought no answer, she wept. Then silence. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. Servants claimed they heard her talking to invisible guests, laughing softly at night, or reciting old Latin prayers backward. Some said she still had her mirror, hidden in the stones, that she gazed into it for hours, searching for her lost youth. The letters from the tower. In her confinement, Elizabeth wrote letters to her son and to Thurzo. Fragments survive, penned in her elegant handwriting. They have taken my freedom, but not my dignity. The world is jealous of greatness. That is my only crime. Tell my children to guard the name Báthory, for history is a liar. No word of confession, no plea for forgiveness, only the cold pride of a woman who believed herself eternal. The death of the Blood Countess, on the night of August 21st, 1614, a guard reported hearing her speak softly through the wall. "I am cold." By morning she was dead, her body lying still, her face serene, as though she had fallen asleep mid-prayer. She was 54 years old. No priest would bless her. No church would take her. Her relatives buried her secretly. First within the castle grounds, then when villagers protested in an unknown location. Her grave has never been found, but some claim that on moonless nights a pale figure could still be seen in the castle tower, brushing her hair in a mirror that no one could find. The legend begins, after her death, stories spread like wildfire. In Vienna, pamphlets depicted her as a vampire, in Transylvania as a witch, in the villages as a demon who still walked among the living. Historians argued for centuries, was she a monster or the victim of political conspiracy? Some claimed her crimes were exaggerated by enemies who coveted her estates. Others pointed to court records and witness accounts too numerous to deny. But the truth, buried beneath centuries of fear and fascination, remained elusive. What was certain was this. A woman once called noble had become a symbol of evil. A castle once proud had become cursed ground. And a name once spoken with reverence now carried the taste of blood. They bricked her into stone and buried her name in silence. Yet even walls could not contain the whispers. Within a generation, Elizabeth Báthory had crossed from the realm of fact into that of legend, not merely a woman now, but a symbol of something eternal, beauty corrupted, power unrestrained, and the darkness that blooms when guilt meets desire, the shadow that wouldn't die after her death. Csejthe Castle was left to rot. The great hall, once filled with banners and music, fell to dust. Rats scurried across her empty throne. Ivy crept up the tower where her final chamber lay sealed. The peasants avoided the place altogether. Travelers who dared to pass by swore they saw flickering lights through the bricked windows, as if candles still burned for the Countess's nightly rituals. But death only made her stronger. Her name spread faster than any army, whispered from Hungary to Austria, to Poland, to Italy. The woman who bathed in blood, the lady of eternal youth, the vampire of Csejthe. Europe, still trembling from plagues, wars, and witch hunts, was ready to believe in monsters, and none fit the part more perfectly than Elizabeth Báthory. The making of a myth a decade after her burial, pamphlets began appearing in Vienna and Prague, describing her as a noblewoman who murdered 600 virgins and drank their blood. Illustrations showed a pale woman standing over a basin, crimson liquid reflecting candlelight. The stories grew with each retelling. Some said she was the student of Satan himself. Others said she had bargained with death, trading the souls of her victims for beauty that would never fade. But even amid hysteria, one detail remained constant. She had done it not for power, not for gold, but for youth. That singular obsession struck a chord in every listener, because everyone feared the same enemy: time, the age of vampires. By the late 17th century, Europe had entered an age obsessed with blood. In the Carpathians, villagers told tales of the Strigoi, the undead who fed on the living. In Germany, pamphlets described corpses that refused to decay. In England, poets wrote of eternal beauty bought at a terrible price, and somewhere between history and horror, Elizabeth's shadow fused with something older. In 1746, the scholar Augustin Calmet published a treatise on vampires and revenants, mentioning a certain Hungarian countess whose crimes resembled vampirism. Her legend, once confined to Hungary, now stalked across Europe's imagination. Then came literature. Writers transformed her into a symbol, part temptress, part fiend. In 18th century France, she inspired the character La Comtesse Sanglante, the bloody countess. A century later, the Gothic revival would resurrect her again, most famously in the shape of Countess Carmilla Karnstein, the female vampire who predated even Dracula. And though Bram Stoker never named her directly, the shadows of Elizabeth's castle linger behind every line of Dracula. The vampire myth, eternal youth through blood, began, many say, with her. The ghost in the castle even centuries later. Csejthe Castle refused to sleep. In the 1800s, travelers visited its ruins, poets, scholars, curious nobles, and each reported strange occurrences. Footsteps in empty corridors, sudden drops in temperature, faint weeping from within the tower where she had died. In 1895, a priest who conducted prayers at the site wrote in his diary, "The air grows heavy near her chamber. No bird sings above that tower. When I spoke her name aloud, the candles flickered blue." Villagers told stories of a woman in white appearing at midnight, her gown trailing crimson, her face flawless, her eyes empty. She was said to offer travelers a goblet of wine, whispering, "Drink, and be young forever." None who accepted were ever seen again. The scholars' debate by the early 20th century. Historians began to question the old accounts. Was Elizabeth Báthory truly guilty of the hundreds of murders attributed to her? Or had she been the victim of political intrigue? Some pointed out that her vast estates were coveted by the crown. Her arrest, trial, and the erasure of her family name conveniently allowed the king to seize her lands and cancel the debts owed to her. Others argued that the evidence, confessions extracted under torture, was unreliable. The court's transcripts, though damning, were written by men who stood to gain from her downfall. A few scholars even suggested she was framed, that the missing girls had fled, not died, and that the rest was hysteria mixed with superstition. But truth, once drowned in blood, rarely resurfaces clean. And so Elizabeth Báthory remained two women at once. The historical Countess, perhaps guilty of cruelty but also of being powerful in a man's world, and the legendary monster immortalized by her own myth. Beauty and blood, what makes her story endure? It is not merely the horror, it is the mirror it holds to our own desires. Every age has sought ways to defeat time. Elixirs, surgeries, miracles, pills. We worship youth as she once did. We fear decay as she did. And somewhere deep within we understand her madness, that hunger to remain beautiful even when the world fades. In her vanity, Elizabeth became a prophecy. She is not the ghost of Hungary alone, but of humanity itself, our obsession with appearances, our blindness to what beauty costs. The Blood Countess reborn, the 20th century resurrected her in art, film, and music. In the 1930s, horror magazines called her the female Dracula. In the 1970s, she became the subject of plays and films, sometimes as a villain, sometimes as a tragic figure cursed by her own reflection. By the 2000s, she had become a symbol of dark feminism, a woman whose brutality was interpreted as rebellion against a patriarchal world. Historians debated, artists romanticized, and Elizabeth's name continued to breathe, reshaped, retold, reborn. Yet beneath every retelling, one truth remained unspoken. Somewhere in the crumbling tower of Csejthe, there was once a woman who believed blood could make her divine, and that belief, more than her crimes, is what damned her. The curse centuries after her death, local legend claims that the ground of Csejthe Castle is still barren where her chamber once stood. Grass will not grow there. Rainwater pools red after storms. Visitors say they feel watched. A chill on the back of the neck. A whisper that sounds like breathing. Some say her curse is eternal. Whoever seeks youth through the suffering of others will inherit her fate. Beauty without peace. Eternity without rest. And so, though her body is gone, her curse remains woven into the human heart, where vanity and cruelty still dance together in the dark. Centuries have passed since Elizabeth Báthory's death, yet her story refuses to fade. Stones crumble, kingdoms vanish, languages die, but her name endures like a scar that will not heal. For even now, 400 years later, we are still trying to answer the same question that haunted her trial. Was she a monster, or a mirror held up to our own darkness? The rediscovery, the 19th century brought with it a new hunger, not for blood but for truth. Historians began combing through archives, reading trial records long forgotten in dusty monasteries. Among them was a Slovak scholar named Matthias Bell, who in 1742 first referenced her as a woman of noble birth, condemned for unspeakable acts, but it was not until the late 1800s that her story truly re-emerged. Researchers unearthed more than 300 witness statements. Some described bodies hidden beneath floorboards. Others spoke of letters Elizabeth herself had written. But in these documents, historians noticed something peculiar, a pattern of exaggeration, repetition and contradiction. It became clear that even in her own lifetime, the line between truth and legend had already blurred. One witness claimed she killed 36 girls. Another said 50. A servant mentioned more than 600, a number that has echoed through history, ever since, and which by all logic was impossible. Was it hysteria? Was it propaganda? Or had her crimes truly reached that magnitude? The answer was lost to time, sealed behind the bricked walls of her chamber. The forensic century by the 20th century, scientists joined the search. Archaeologists explored the ruins of Csejthe Castle, uncovering fragments of pottery, rusted chains, and scorched stone. Beneath the chapel, they discovered shallow graves, but age and erosion made identification impossible. No DNA could confirm whether they were victims or centuries-old villagers buried during war or plague. The bones told stories of malnutrition, disease, and sometimes violence, but never certainty. In 1970, a Hungarian historian named Dr. Laszlo Nagy published The Truth About the Blood Countess. He proposed a radical idea that Elizabeth was not a killer at all, but the victim of political greed. Her wealth, he argued, made her dangerous. Her gender made her vulnerable. The charges, exaggerated by men eager to seize her estates, created a monster where there had once been only a powerful woman. His book sparked outrage and fascination. For the first time, Elizabeth Báthory was no longer simply a demon in human skin. She became a question about power, gender, and history itself. The feminist reclamation. The late 20th century saw her story transformed again, this time by artists and scholars who viewed her through a modern lens. To some, Elizabeth was a symbol of female rage repressed by patriarchal society, a woman denied power except through cruelty. To others, she remained a warning, proof that beauty and obsession can corrupt even the noblest soul. In the 1990s, writers and filmmakers began exploring her psychology rather than her monstrosity. Films such as Báthory, Countess of Blood, and novels like The Blood Confession imagined her not as a fiend, but as a tragic figure, intelligent, ambitious, trapped in a world that punished her for both. Psychologists revisited her case, calling it one of history's earliest examples of narcissistic psychopathy, or perhaps undiagnosed mental illness, compounded by trauma, isolation, and privilege. She was not a witch, they said. She was a woman undone by obsession, and by the power no one dared to question. The modern myth today, Elizabeth Báthory exists in two worlds at once. In history books, she is a noblewoman tried and condemned in 1611. In popular culture, she is immortal, the Blood Countess, the first female vampire, the woman who bathed in blood to preserve her youth. Her story has appeared in countless forms. Novels by writers from France to Japan, operas and ballets, where she dances through crimson mist, heavy metal songs and Gothic art, where her beauty becomes both weapon and curse. Even modern fashion, where designers name perfumes and couture lines after her. Each retelling reshapes her. Villain, victim, seductress, goddess, each age creates the Elizabeth it needs, because in truth, her story was never just about her, it is about us, our fascination with darkness, our hunger for immortality, our willingness to turn cruelty into beauty if it dazzles us enough. The castle today, the ruins of Csejthe, still stand. High in the Slovak hills, half swallowed by forest, the castle overlooks the valley like a broken crown. Tourists climb its winding path, cameras in hand, expecting to find a haunted ruin. What they find instead is silence, and a cold wind that seems to breathe from the stones. The tower where she was imprisoned remains partly intact. Local guides refuse to enter after dusk. The air feels heavy there, one said, like someone still breathing on the other side of the wall. In the village below, souvenir shops sell blood-red wine called Countess Báthory's Kiss. A nearby inn bears her family crest, 3 wolf teeth on a field of crimson. The line between history and tourism blurs, as it always does when legend becomes economy. But in the candlelit chapel, a plaque bears an inscription that few notice. Elizabeth Báthory, 1560-1614. Here ends her story, or perhaps begins it anew. The science of fear. Modern neuroscience offers one more explanation for the endurance of her myth. Stories of beauty and horror stimulate the same regions of the human brain, desire and dread intertwined. We are both drawn to and repelled by what she represents. To see her portrait, pale, regal, calm, is to feel that strange mix of fascination and unease, because somewhere in her gaze, behind the velvet and lace, we see the reflection of something disturbingly familiar, the part of ourselves that would do anything to stay beautiful, to stay young, to stay remembered. Elizabeth's immortality was never in her blood. It was in our memory of her, the immortal mirror, And so, 4 centuries later, the Countess lives on in stories, in art, in our imagination. She has become more than human. She is myth incarnate. Every time a mirror captures vanity, every time ambition turns cruel, every time beauty becomes obsession, her reflection stirs behind the glass. We do not need her castle to summon her. She exists wherever desire outlives mercy. The Blood Countess never needed to drink blood to live forever. She needed only us to remember her. Legends do not die. They change shape, and Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess, has become something far more enduring than a woman or a monster. She has become a reflection. The eternal chamber night in the ruins of Csejthe Castle feels timeless. The forest whispers, the wind slides through hollow windows, and the moon paints the stones in silver. Visitors say if you stand before the tower's sealed wall at midnight, you can still hear faint sounds and a sigh, a slow step, a heartbeat. But perhaps what we hear is not her ghost. Perhaps it is memory, echoing back what humanity refuses to forget. For what truly haunts us is not the image of a woman bathing in blood, but the realization that we made her immortal by needing her to exist. A century of ballads, books, and films have turned her into something eternal, the embodiment of our fascination with the forbidden, the mask beneath the crown. If we strip away the myth, the blood, the torture, the mirrors, what remains of Elizabeth Báthory? A brilliant, ambitious woman born into a cruel world that gave her everything except freedom. She mastered languages, politics, medicine, skills few men of her era could match. Yet her intellect and beauty were twisted into weapons against her. Her defiance was called madness. Her discipline was called cruelty. Her solitude was called evil. Perhaps she was guilty of terrible things. Perhaps not, but the more one studies her life, the clearer it becomes. The woman and the myth were never separate. The myth was born the moment power met fear, and fear demanded a story to contain it. The 17th century could not imagine a woman wielding power without punishment. So it wrote her into legend, as punishment eternal. The Court of Shadows. In the silence of her cell, they say Elizabeth wrote prayers on the walls with her own nails. No one knows if this is true, but if we could see those words, perhaps they would not be pleas for mercy, but for memory. Because that, in the end, is what she achieved. Long after her death, the men who judged her were forgotten. Their castles fell, their bloodlines vanished, their names erased by time, but hers, Elizabeth Báthory, still lives. The woman they tried to bury became the queen of all who cannot be silenced. Her legend, born in cruelty, transformed into an empire of art, books, music, and nightmares, an empire more enduring than any she ruled in life. For every century remakes her in its own image. The 1600s made her a monster, the 1800s made her a myth, the 1900s made her a metaphor, the 2000s made her immortal, the mirror and the blood. There is an old saying in Transylvania, when you gaze long into the mirror begins to gaze back. Elizabeth's mirror still gazes back at us. In an age obsessed with eternal youth, she feels strangely modern. We inject, filter, and sculpt ourselves, trying to conquer time, just as she once tried with blood. Her legend becomes prophecy, a story of vanity turned into faith, of beauty transformed into a religion, and in that reflection, she no longer stands alone. We stand beside her, complicit in the same worship of appearance over soul, of youth over wisdom, of illusion over truth. Her castle was her prison. Ours is made of glass. The unwritten ending in 1614, when the guards entered her chamber, they found Elizabeth lying on her side, as if asleep. Her skin was pale but serene, her expression peaceful. No one saw fear or pain, only quiet. Some say her lips curved into a faint smile, as if she knew she had won something no one else understood. Perhaps she had realized that legends like blood never dry completely. They seep into the soil, into memory, into stories told centuries later by candlelight or screen glow. Every retelling gives her new life. Every whisper keeps her pulse alive, and so she sleeps, not in death, but in remembrance. The last question was Elizabeth Báthory a murderer, or a myth created to punish a woman who defied the world that made her? The answer may never be found in any archive, any document. Any relic. It lives instead in the unease that lingers whenever her name is spoken. It is the question that keeps her alive. What if the monster was not born, but made? For that question is far more terrifying than any tale of blood. The final reflection: imagine her now, not as a ghost or a corpse, but as a presence standing at the edge of time. Her velvet gown is faded, her jewels dimmed, yet her eyes remain bright. Two mirrors reflecting every face that has ever feared her, loved her, or told her story. She speaks not in accusation, but in truth. You built me. You gave me blood when you craved it, beauty when you worshipped it, cruelty when you needed it. I am every age's reflection and in every age's sin. And then, she turns away, her silhouette dissolving into shadow. Only her voice remains. Soft, eternal, the mirror remembers. Epilogue. The Blood Countess lives today. Scholars still debate. Tourists still climb the hill to her ruins. And filmmakers still chase her ghost. Each century believes it has discovered the real Elizabeth Báthory, but the truth is simpler and far darker. She is not a person anymore. She is an idea, the embodiment of how power, fear, and obsession twist together until they become legend. And legends, like blood, do not fade, they stain.